Growth Network meeting. Thank you so much for joining us for the Smart Growth Network quarterly discussion on extreme heat. And thank you so much to SGA for hosting. My name is Yvonne Marzouk. I'm part of the EPA coordinating team for the Smart Growth Network. And I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful representative from EPA, Joel Sharaga, who is here. We've always been so happy to be able to bring different speakers, part of EPA, to share. And we're really excited to have Joel share a little bit about some of the great things happening at EPA related to extreme heat. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Senior Advisor for Climate Adaptation in the Office of Policy at EPA, and on behalf of the agency, it's a pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this Smart Growth Network quarterly discussion. It's particularly relevant that we're all here at this time because on this increasingly relevant topic of extreme heat, and in particular, how smart growth solutions can help us deal with and mitigate the effects of these extreme heat events. And I couldn't help but reflect that even as we're sitting here today, people from coast to coast are enduring dangerous heat waves. I was looking at some of the data, and just last week on the West Coast, over 60 million people were under heat alerts. With some cities, in fact, breaking all-time records for consecutive days of heat. And just one example, Las Vegas saw 5 consecutive days of 115 degrees or more. And in fact, 3 of those days surpassed 117 degrees, which was a record for them. They had never seen that happen before. I can't overemphasize that everyone in cities that are experiencing these heat waves are at risk. Bottom line is extreme heat kills. And what also complicates this is that we know that extreme heat and climate change, which is increasing the frequency and intensity of these sorts of events, do not impact everyone equally. We know that people in underserved communities experience a disproportionate exposure and harm due to the historical patterns of inequities, socioeconomic disparities, and quite frankly, systemic environmental injustices, which we at EPA are committed to dealing with. And I have to say, this has been an exciting time. It's certainly been very encouraging just in this past year, watching what's going on at the federal government, the state level, across the country. We've been making a lot of progress dealing with and advancing equitable heat resilience. But at the same time, we know that there's still an awful lot that needs to be, and it shocks me to have to say that heat continues to be the leading weather-related killer in the United States, causing hundreds of fatalities each year. And I have to say, when I saw that number, I said, gosh, these are avoidable deaths. These are avoidable deaths. So what are we doing at EPA about that? I'm really privileged to be able to report to you that we now have a lot of programs and resources to help inform and support extreme heat solutions in communities and in tribes across the country. I'll give you one example. Our Climate Resilient Schools program helps schools districts upgrade their buildings to advance health equity and ensure that schools become safe places during a range of climate impacts, including heat waves. The other exciting thing I can report on is we all know at the end of the day, building resilience and adapting to climate change and these extreme events costs money. And we now have major funding opportunities for communities across the nation. Thanks to the historic Infrastructure Reduction Act, as well as the bilateral infrastructure law, which brought $100 billion to EPA. That's billions with a B, which is a mind-boggling amount of money. We at EPA are now able to make unprecedented investments to build resilience to the impacts of climate change to communities like yours, and at the same time to curb greenhouse gas emissions that exacerbate climate change. And at the end of the day, these vast funding opportunities allow communities like yours to incorporate heat resilient solutions into the broader topics of climate action as well as pollution reduction. I like to say the proof is always in the pudding when we make strong statements like that. So I want to give you just a couple of examples of these funding opportunities, these major funding opportunities that now exist. Our community change grants will provide approximately $2 billion in funding to support community-driven projects to tackle environmental and climate justice challenges, including mitigating the risk from urban heat islands and extreme heat. And I'm really excited to say that 100% of the benefits of the program will go to disadvantaged communities that have been underserved and overburdened. Again, we're walking the walk. We're not just talking the talk in terms of advancing environmental justice and climate justice. We've also learned, as we've tried to make these investments over the last couple of years, we've also learned about the challenges that these underserved communities have, just identifying where those funding opportunities are and actually applying for those grants. And I'm pleased to report that we're now helping disaster-prone and disadvantaged communities actually apply for these grants through the Community Change Equitable Resilience Technical Assistance Program. It's a mouthful. So that's one major funding opportunity. It's just one example. One other quick one is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, which I'm sure most of you have heard about, which is providing over $4.6 billion to states, local governments, tribes, and territories to develop and implement plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And my colleague Paul over there is one of the people leading the effort to actually get those dollars out the door. Given all that, if I leave you with one key message today, I want to emphasize that we at the EPA are partners with you, along with other federal agencies, to increase your ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to the impacts of climate change, including extreme heat and other weather events. Back in 2021, soon after he came to the EPA as our administrator, Administrator Michael Regan directed every single program office and regional office at EPA to partner with states, tribes, local governments, environmental justice organizations, community groups, businesses, as well as other federal agencies to strengthen adaptive capacity and increase the resilience of the entire nation, again, while advancing environmental justice. I have to say, we immediately, within 100 days, we came out with our 2021 Climate Adaptation Action Plan. And if you look at that plan, as well as the new updated plan that was released just last month by the White House and the EPA, you actions every program and regional office at EPA is taking in order to meet that directive from the administrator. And you'll see we are really mainstream and integrate climate adaptation planning into all of our programs, policies, our rulemaking processes, our enforcement activities, and our own operations, and the actions we're taking to increase the resilience of your communities. You'll also see, and I'm really excited to say this, you'll also see a major commitment by us to modernize all of our financial assistance programs, our grants, loans, contracts, cooperative agreements, and more, to encourage climate smart, climate resilient investments across the nation, including those to protect human health and the well-being of people during heat waves. And just as an aside, a little dose of humility on our own part, you'll see in our new plan that came out last month, you'll see that we're also making a commitment to take care of our own workforce and our own facilities, because we face the same risks during things like heat waves and flooding events that you do. So we're also adapting. Quick aside, in addition to our agency-wide plans, at the end of the day, it's about your local communities. Every single one of our regional offices also has a climate adaptation implementation plan focused on their region and their states and their communities. So I encourage you to look at those. Very quickly, because I want to be respectful of your time, just a couple more messages. I want to immediately share with you an exciting development at EPA that actually is strengthening our ability to be supportive of you. Our Office of Policy, and again, Paul and I are in the Office of Policy with others, we've actually been overseeing and coordinating all the agencies' work on climate adaptation for, since 2010, when I came to the Office of Policy. But I'm excited to say that in March of this year, we actually have institutionalized into the fabric of the agency this critically important work by creating a brand new Office of Climate Adaptation and Sustainability. And the new office is committed to equipping communities and tribes and indigenous peoples with the tools, the data, the information, and the technical support that they need to assess their risks and to develop the climate resilient solutions most appropriate for them. And at the end of the day, it's up to them to really decide what is most important to them. So given all that, I just want to conclude by emphasizing a really important point that was made in the National Climate Resilience Framework that was released by the White House last September at a major summit. The framework has my favorite phrase, actually, in the entire framework. The framework emphasizes that tackling the climate crisis and protecting ourselves against the impacts of climate change is an all hands on deck effort. We're not in it alone. Coming up with solutions to the risks we're all facing due to climate change requires collaboration between the federal government, states, tribes, local communities, businesses have to be engaged, NGOs, and networks like the Smart Growth Network. And networks like this, made up of people like you and me sitting around the table and online, provide opportunities to build trust. I can't overemphasize that. It's about relationships, networks, building trust, leveraging our assets and resources, and collaborating on the thorniest challenges. Folks, we're trying to do things that have never been done before. We're going to make some mistakes, but we need to learn from them. And together, we can share our new insights, identify solutions, challenge what we think we know. Really, let's really challenge ourselves and question ourselves and then move forward together. And I have to say that that's really the value of the Smart Growth Network. And that's why I personally was excited to be invited here, to be here with you today, along with you to continue to learn from one another, to collaborate with each other, and at the risk of sounding corny, to continue building a world that is better prepared to face these unprecedented challenges. So bottom line is I really appreciate all your hard work. And the leadership that you're showing as a network. And I really look forward to hearing where it goes from here and learning from you. And without further ado, then I apologize, that's 2 minutes over. I'm going to turn it over to my really good friend and colleague who I haven't seen in a long time, Danielle Aragoni, who's a board member. So it's all yours.
Joel, I could listen to you all day, so no apologies for going long. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Catherine, for the invitation. Sorry to miss Calvin, but glad I could be here sort of in his stead. I guess it seems an awkward position, but I get to wear a few hats today. The first hat is as a Smart Growth Network board member, which I'm happy to be part of, and welcome everyone to Smart Growth Network in this great new space that I think the team is now just starting to get comfortable in. I want to ground our work today in Smart Growth Network's in Smart Growth America's vision statement. I think it says Smart Growth Network for Smart Growth America's board. But the vision statement for Smart Growth America is, I'll just read it as a reminder. We envision a country where no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that's healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And I think, you know, those words kind of in some ways are time immemorial, but I think they really take on new significance and importance when you think about the risks that Joel's just described and that we're all experiencing with regards to heat and climate more broadly. Smart Growth America's strategies, of course, are to enact change and to lead change through technical assistance and advocacy and thought leadership. And that partnership between Smart Growth America and Smart Growth Network, including, as I understand it, maybe a web mashup, which is exciting, is many years in the making. Like, this is a partnership that's existed for a long time, and I see lots of familiar names and, you know, virtual faces online, because the partnership between EPA and Smart Growth Network has Smart Growth America has existed for a long time, so it's exciting to see it continue to evolve. The work that Smart Growth America does is so important. I think, you know, things like Complete Streets, where we're thinking about how to eliminate some of the impervious cover in our streets, return those public assets into ones that better serve the environment and people and create safer spaces in so doing. Those kinds of things are so important in this new climate future. But I want to kind of take off the Smart Growth America board member hat for a second and put on my National Housing Trust hat, which is where I work now. I'm the managing director for policy there, and talk about housing, because housing is so germane to this as well. We are a national nonprofit looking to develop and retrofit affordable housing. We advocate for sustainable investments in affordable housing. And we know that extreme heat poses real risks for those we serve. We operate about 4,000 homes in the mid-Atlantic largely, and we're very intentional in trying to design and develop and retrofit properties that reduce the energy burden for our residents. We know that low-income people on average spend somewhere between 6% and 9% of their income on utilities. The national average is 3%. When you think about what trade-offs that requires in terms of food or economic opportunities, employment opportunities, education, that's a pretty significant chunk of change. And that is 100% related to the environmental conditions that we find ourselves in. So our work at National Housing Trust is really to both model that work and then to lead the industry, help lead the industry towards interventions that drive equitable climate investments that in affordable housing that benefit our residents and frankly, that benefit affordable housing owners as well, because if we can't afford to own properties and operate properties sustainably, those affordable units go away to all of our demise. Lastly, I want to just pick up on a data point that Joel shared and kind of put on my third hat, which is I wrote a book called Climate Resilience for an Aging Nation after working at AARP for 5 years. And Joel shared the statistic of hundreds of people dying in heat-related illnesses every year. A statistic that I share in my book is that 12,000 people die a year from heat, and 80% of those are people over 60. So I can't help but think about heat and not think about the implications that has for older adults. Again, when you think about utility costs, older adults, many of whom already live near or below the poverty line, have to make really difficult decisions about how much heat they can withstand in their homes and how much they can afford to cool or warm those homes. So we know already that 7 million older adults go without food or medicine in order to pay utility bills. And again, that is a direct result of, it's a direct byproduct of the changing environmental conditions that we've got and the housing stock that we see, that we make available to older adults and people of all ages. Not to mention, of course, the sort of underlying medical conditions that extreme heat can complicate, all of which adds to additional risk for older adults. So this is an equity discussion at its heart. It's certainly an environmental discussion at its heart. It's an economic vibrancy discussion at its heart. And it kind of takes us back to the statement of, trying to create places that are healthy, prosperous, and resilient. And to do so with a real clear sense of what extreme heat means for that challenge. So with that, I'm excited to turn it over to Joseph Mendonca, who is SGA's Climate Program Associate.
Thank you, Danielle. Hi, everybody. I am so glad you were able to join us. Quick housekeeping things. Women's bathroom, there's a key fob on the table by the coffee if you need to access that. And if there's a fire, God forbid, use the stairs, not the elevator. Now, on to the topic of the day. I'm so glad, Danielle, that you mentioned housing stock and really at its core, extreme heat being an equity issue, because obviously at Smart Growth America, we believe that as well. We're going to show you a video today that we produced in collaboration with the Partnership for Southern Equity based in Atlanta. This is part of a 3-year engagement, and we went in and we talked to community residents, advocates, policy leaders, and we wanted to hear from them about their experiences with extreme heat, what they're hoping to see Atlanta looks like when it's prepared for extreme heat in the future, and what the steps are for getting there. So without further ado, I will show you all the video.
I was in 3rd grade playing outside with my friends in the summer. One of the hottest days I remember. It's really bad. And I actually passed out. And when I woke up, I was in an ambulance with my mom, and they were telling me it was too hot for me to be outside. And if I would have been outside even longer, I would have had a heat stroke.
And when you factor in that humidity, some spots will be over 108, some spots will be over 110.
What is during heat wave blanketing the US?
When we talk about extreme heat and we talk about the impact of climate change, one of the ways that we are noticing this more recently and historically is that people are leaving their homes at unsafe temperatures.
The senior high-rise apartment complex in its close proximity to downtown Atlanta. In the community, we have a garden, we have a picnic area, but those places are useless when it's 98 degrees outside. So that means we are stuck inside in our apartment.
I have a fear that we're not quite as prepared as we need to be in Atlanta. When we talk about populations who are most at risk, we're looking at the same communities that in many cases don't have the protection from tree canopy, have concrete, have industrial development nearby, and don't have the natural cooling that green space gives us. We continue to experience these temperatures as more and more people need refuge. It's always been hot in Atlanta.
My elders said to me, this is some of the hottest that I've ever witnessed. If it gets too hot, then a lot of people are not aware of the dangers of the environment.
Was so hot that it was like affecting attendance to classes. The sheer amount of sunlight and heat also made people really, really tired. And on a campus as sprawling as Georgia Tech is, you need to be outdoors to get from place to place.
Exposure to extreme heat has been associated with a number of chronic disease conditions. People who already have chronic conditions might be more vulnerable to exposure to extreme heat.
Everybody here is born with asthma. I was born with asthma. You can ask me about friends, they all have asthma. Hair is already really bad. And then when you pair that with it being swelteringly outside, it literally feels like you're suffocating going outside sometimes.
We have less green spaces. There was no grass where I lived. There are no trees where I lived. There was no place to actually run away from the extreme heat unless you were inside. And AC is a privilege. You can't just have your AC running all the time. There's a serious financial impact to residents. With older housing stock, their homes are energy inefficient, meaning that the same window unit source here's a being.
We have to stick our AC full blast all the time for it to do what it needs to do. So we're spending a lot of money on just energy costs to compensate for like the old infrastructure of the homes. I feel like it tends to be for people who don't have a built environment to be comfortable in, especially as the temperatures get crazy.
Just like, what is this $800 bill? I think what we have to do is make sure that those that are most vulnerable to energy burden are made aware of the different programs that are available right now.
We need our teachers, we need our community members, we need people who are already in office. We need everyone on board to fight this issue before it gets worse than it already is.
I encourage residents to build coalitions and do these apartments, engaging with their management company, showing that not only they're doing what's necessary to make the houses more habitable, no weatherized, you know, that we have the backing of the city of Atlanta.
It doesn't matter if people have degrees in science or have been formally trained, they can all play some role in helping to raise the awareness about critical issues impacting our communities. As Chief Sustainability Officer at the city, we are really focused in on the cooling centers we call the city and a forest. And we know that trees help shade the city's cool, but they also keep our infrastructure cool. When our infrastructure is cooler, we don't have to ramp up our mechanical systems. And as we move towards a more comprehensive climate resilience action plan, we need to have voices from those historically marginalized communities.
We gotta all come together some kind of way and come up with solutions so your grandchildren will have someplace to live.
I would love for Atlanta to be a place that's comfortable, a place that's livable, and a place that's prepared.
All right, so that was our look at the extreme heat issue in Atlanta. And now I will turn it over to Catherine to talk about our panel.
Well, thank you so much, Joseph. And before we move into I wanted to see if anyone had questions on the story behind or the process behind the video. Joseph, and then also Jamie, the senior program manager. We're a key team behind the video. So if anyone has any questions, now is a good time.
So I had a question. Could you guys talk about how you want to use the video now that it's available to the public?
Yeah, we are doing a screening at the PSC offices next week. We're trying to get together community residents, activists, some of the people in the video as well. We really want to use this video to kind of galvanize a little bit of support for Atlanta's sustainability initiatives as it does work in extreme heat. We're also, a lot of the community residents we interviewed in the video were from a community advisory board that PSC convened, residents from primarily Southwest Atlanta, which was their focus area for equity reasons. So we want to make sure that they have a voice in this whole process and that they can help move things forward.
Yeah, and I'll also add that kind of the whole process of engaging in this video project has really inspired that community advisory board to kind of take on greater policy advocacy roles in their community. And they've already applied to a couple micro grants to help install things like local water stations with the local businesses there. And so even though we just released it last month, we're really happy to see that like it's actually taking some other concrete forms moving forward.
I'll say quickly as well before I move seats for good visibility online that it's on YouTube, so it's publicly available. So it's really such an honor to have a group here that reaches such a large audience and all different types of constituencies in the smart growth movement. So feel free to use it or share it. It's out there, and our whole point is to get the residents' priorities and stories out to the larger world. So. Ooh. And someone should feel free to grab this chair as we do some musical chairs. Ooh. Well, everyone, again, it's so wonderful to have this group gathered here today. I'm Catherine Burgess, and I lead the land use and development team at Smart Growth America and also sit on the Smart Growth Network Steering Committee. And I think this group is really special in that it brings together so many organizations doing important work in the smart growth movement, reaching different audiences, and then brings that nonprofit and capacity building sector together with federal government. So we can share the work that we're doing, learn from each other, and have a really strong network moving forward. So appreciate everyone taking the time out of your busy days to be here. So to build from the start with the inspiring words from Joel and Danielle, and then to build from the video, we are really thrilled to have this panel with a wide range of expertise today. And also to recognize, even just in the survey preparing for this event, we got to get some exposure to the work related to extreme heat and smart growth that so many organizations here are doing. So we're using this panel to kick off the discussion, but then we're really eager to open the floor to questions, discussion points, and we'll also move into breakout groups as a chance for more direct exchange. And we also welcome everyone online. We're thrilled we're able to reach a larger community of people with the hybrid option. So please, add your questions or comments in the chat. We have the chat monitored here in the room, and we'll have the virtual breakout as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce our three speakers today. We have Shana Udvardi from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and Shana is the Senior Climate Resilience Policy Analyst. It brings us expertise in climate science and policy, and has also worked at the Center for Clean Air Policy and American Rivers. I saw one of our graphics had some American Rivers data, I believe, so that was exciting to see. At left, we have Dexter Locke, who is the research geographer from the USDA Forest Service at the Baltimore Field Station. So thank you for traveling in from Baltimore. And he's previously worked in research at University of Maryland. We have some University of Maryland representation today, as well as at New York City Parks and Rec. So, excited to also think about the important role of green spaces. And Dexter has completed applied research on residential housing segregation and tree canopy, which we're hoping to hear about today. And then further at left, welcome, we have Joshua Simon, the Senior Manager of Community Engagement I'm like at American Forest. So we have American Forest all around, but like Smart Growth Network also, it brings people together and people move between organizations and you see the connectivity, which I love. And Joshua strengthens communities impacted by tree inequities, and will be speaking about a lot of engagement organizing work today, and previously worked at a regional park district in Ohio. So another parks connection. So I think before we have, a number of discussion questions, be great. Those are the sort of formal bios. If you'd like to start by just, reintroducing yourself and in one sentence how your work connects extreme heat and smart growth, we could start off with that lightning round.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, hello, everybody. It's great to be here. So my work is at the federal level. I work on climate resilience policy. And we at UCS do technical rigorous analysis to help inform and educate decision makers. And our a project that we did a few years ago is called Killer Heat. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But we use downscale data to help educate folks on what we're going to be seeing with climate change into the future, the type of heat we're going to be seeing. And so with that, we're able to better kind of inform the type of policies we're advocating.
Thank you. Dexter.
Dexter Locke, I'm a research geographer, and trees provide so many benefits to cities, many ecosystem services from habitat and stormwater absorbing, where of course today's focus, heat, they mitigate heat through evapotranspiration and shading and by altering the aerodynamics of urban canyons. And it's a newer part of my research portfolio, but all of my research has been very applied with many community partners and NGOs and moving from a .gov kind of research to .gov/.edu/.org and the missing .com, trying to get all the partners around the table to do some really get some actionable intelligence for the people that can make decisions.
Thank you. So on my community engagement side, very much understand that data supports that there's a lot of inequities that happen that are existing in our communities and how trees play a part in that. And so what our National Explorer Tree Ecology Score, many people are familiar about, was actually quoted on the video there. My role is kind of focused around our deep dive tool, which is Tree Ecology Score Analyzer tool, what we call TESSA. And that is a localized tool that's actually built through stakeholders and local implementation with people on the ground, whether it's nonprofit leaders, community elders, just people out doing the work. And so my role is making sure that we build those connections and help provide capacity for our stakeholders on the ground to ensure that not only are we helping prioritize or plant these trees, but also as we're going to plant trees in communities, making sure that we involving and the community members on the ground and not just going in and say, hey, we're going to plant 5 trees here. Is I know, how do you all want to see this look? Is there a way to bring into the work, and just ways to do it in more community focused work to realize that our work is impactful, to make it more impactful with the communities that we're serving.
Thank you. Well, we have a few questions prepared and hope you all jump in, and excited to have a conversation move forward. So Shauna, we're hoping you could start by talking to us a bit about the climate science behind all of this. Why are we seeing what we're seeing right now?
Absolutely. Yeah. Why don't we go to one of the slides? I think we know that since let's see. What do I want to, which slide do I want to select? Maybe the next one. There we go. Okay. So we know from the United Nations Copernicus Climate Services that we have had over a year of record-breaking heat, and that this heat has been for each month over 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we know that because of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, we're warming the planet, and that we've been doing this since industrial times, where we're burning fossil fuels. The fossil fuels have things like emitting carbon dioxide, which acts like a planet and heats up the atmosphere. So it's as someone recently said, is pretty basic physics. But what I can show you here on this graph here, I don't know if the people online have the slides or not, probably not, but we can send them to you. Oh, great. Okay. But what you're seeing on the x-axis on the bottom is timeline, and then on the y-axis, you're seeing the gigatons of carbon per year. And the black line is showing historical, and then we're seeing different emissions scenarios, carbon emissions scenarios. And so we utilize this type of climate modeling for our report called Killer Heat in the United States. And what you're seeing is that it's been on an increase, and that what we do today and yesterday and moving forward really is going to make a difference on the type of heat that we're going to see. There's some heat that's already been baked in, but as you can see with the red line at the top is no action. And with that, we could see up to by the end of the century, we could see really extraordinary amount of heat. And the unfortunate news is this is actually where we are today. This is the trajectory that we're on today as far as the type of emissions we're releasing. Slow action in yellow is the next line down, and that would be about 4 degrees in addition to 4 degrees Fahrenheit, more or less. And what you would see is that it would increase to about 2040, 2050, and then we'd start seeing a decline in the amount of heat. And then what we really are hoping for is this rapid action where we can get heat down below an increase of 4 degrees Fahrenheit. And you see that where we would get to kind of a evening off at about 2030, and then we would see a steep decline from there on in. So with this analysis, you can go to the next slide, I think. Let me just go back up 1 or 2. I'm sorry, I'm looking for the one with a chart of the different types of, okay, thank you. So with this analysis, and it gets to kind of the, maybe skipping around a little bit, but how heat affects people. We wanted to look at, will you cut me off? Is this okay if I keep going?
And then we'll
Okay,
cut, yeah.
okay, thank you. We wanted to look at the heat index because, as you guys know, the heat index includes temperature and humidity, and it's how people really feel the heat. It's the, feels like temperature. And so we looked at these 4 different categories, and you'll see that 80 degrees Fahrenheit heat index is really where it's only really going to affect and be really problematic as far as health for those people who are doing rigorous work outside, like farmers, construction workers, those kind of folks. The heat index of 100 degrees Fahrenheit is, as we heard in the video, is going to be more problematic for people with chronic conditions like asthma, like who may have already conditions, with health, et cetera. When we're at the 105 degrees heat index, this is really going to be problematic for anybody spending any kind of time outdoors. So this is a very bad temperature. And we just heard from Joel that the temperatures, what was it in Los Angeles, that were much higher than that.
Yep.
So it's really pretty scary. And then what we're seeing in black is this heat index that's off the charts. So literally we looked at modeling these different heat scenario, global change scenarios, and found that it's in some places by the end of the century, we're actually going to see heat indices that are not on the heat index chart. They're actually called, there wasn't a term, so we said off the charts. So what we're going to need to be doing is updating and figuring out how can we, update, I believe it's the National Weather Service heat index. So let's go back down to the next slide, and I'll just.
And can I actually ask a follow-up question on
please go
that,
ahead.
on that one? I'm going off the cuff here. I think this explains the danger zone outside really clearly and accessibly. Have you done comparable work of how the heat index translates into unsafe indoor spaces? Thinking about people who are stuck in areas without air conditioning, perhaps on upper floors, like where that kind of, where the risk spectrum is in comparison to heat index?
I have not, but I don't know, maybe Daniela has some
Well,
ideas.
it's making me wonder if there is a difference,
Yeah.
like if the heat index is 100 degrees of whether you're inside or outside.
Yeah.
I don't know that it matters.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a great question. I don't know.
Not just interesting, it
Yeah.
can be an interesting applied
Yeah.
follow-up.
Well, but the other thing about that is that maybe indoor you have less ability to even regulate the temperature.
Mhm.
It's gonna be boxed in, there's less ventilation, so once the heat is there, it's harder to bring down the temperature, whereas maybe in an outdoor situation when the sun falls, winds pick up, it clears the heat a little bit faster. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
And it gets to the point of measurement. So there's also wet bulb globe temperature, which you all may have heard of. That's what the military uses. And so that actually includes a lot more types of indicators like shade and like wind. So it can be more accurate, I guess. So.
Well, I think as maybe we keep
Yeah, we
this
can
up on
keep going.
personal and community impact, I wanted to turn it over to Joshua to share like what are you seeing in your advocacy and outreach work in terms of how communities are being affected by extreme heat?
Sure. Could you put my slide up, please? I think it was on the earlier ones. Yeah. So I recognize climate change, urban heat islands, and different social economic disparities are occurring. And on a local level, just here in DC area, kind of pulled from our tree equity score is that we are recognizing that coolest neighborhoods are 4.5 times more tree canopy. And some of your disproportionately lower income residents or sometimes 63% more low income residents suffer from higher rates of heat. And one of the things that we're noticing as we're kind of working with some of our community partners is that something needs to be done. Something needs to be done yesterday. And although we recognize trees is one of our kind of our components, that's like it gives you opportunity to, think about the future, but people are struggling now. And so I think I always tell them, like, we plant trees now, we can kind of help, here and be resilient for some of these issues in the future. And one thing I pulled this from our National Explorer, and our National Explorer allows you to see tree equity score based on few factors that we factor into the tool. And just looking up here at the difference between Anacostia and Georgetown, just one of these neighborhoods I looked at is a 75, and you can't quite see it on the scale now because it's small, but if you have access to this free open source data, you're able to see that just at the spectrum how many the yellow or kind of orange is just areas that need tree coverage the most or suffering the most, and you look at areas that are higher income and less, they have more access to trees. And so one of the things we learn in our communities is that they are hoping for something. They are trying to do everything they can, and how can they get access to opportunities, to whether it's infrastructure, whether it is funding, just ways to be able to advocate for their communities. And even with our tree equity score, even though it allows us to see like a priority of where to plant trees, we also say, even though it says that, but we need to go out and work with the community and see what are some of their inputs first, because we may see it as open space for trees, but it may be a place where children play. And so maybe putting 5 trees down the middle may not actually make sense for their usage patterns. So I kind of pulled that from my parks background, is how are people utilizing access in these urban parks and green spaces. So there can be ways of just I can check with the community, how can we co-create and build this space for tree plantings, but also how can we help you use this tool on your own? When we were maybe not there, you can use this to advocate for funding, just ways to kind of get your community together and say, here's some of the disparities we're seeing in our community. How can we take this data, this free data, and bring this to our supporters or our just family and friends and say, let's make a way to try to help cool our communities and cities right now.
Thank you. And before a follow-up question, can you share a bit about the tree equity score and the access to that? So I think we have community of data nerds here, and I'm not sure if everyone's aware of it.
Yeah, that tool is free, and it's at treeecrityscore.org. We have our National Explorer, which is access to over 200,000 urban neighborhoods in the U.S. based on census tract data. And then we also have our Tree Equity Score Analyzer, and we have about 15 or so of those live now. We have one in DC area, and those are the ones that we actually partner with people on the ground with stakeholders to help us build that, because some of the data factors on there are unique to those areas. And so what may be helpful in DC might not be helpful in Dallas, Texas. And so that's why we really rely on our stakeholders to say what parts of the data you want on this. And as I was kind of coming into American Forest right around the DC launch, I was interviewing someone to work for a nonprofit that worked on faith-based research. And one of the things they want to know is how can we maybe get a layer there to look at faith-based houses, faith-based worship centers. And I said, I've never thought to add it to the tool. I told it to our JS team, did some research, and that was added to that tool. So this is one of those ways that no matter where you are, you're able to access information, and just really highlights not only the tree equity movement, but just ways to advocate toward different resources for people who are hoping to do something who may not have the chance or the time to build something like this from scratch using ArcGIS or QGIS systems.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm sure there'll be a few, folks in the room that are checking that out. And probably someone on there has it open in another tab window.
Yes.
I think with this slide on the screen and with the data here, it's so clear how fundamentally discriminatory and harmful and aligned with discriminatory land use policy these heat impacts and tree inequities are. And I wanted to turn it to Dexter to talk to us about that. How are you seeing discriminatory land use policy and housing policy impact tree canopy and vulnerability to urban heat island?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I said I'm a geographer, I'm also a data nerd. And in developing high resolution land cover mapping systems, one of the most clear and consistent findings we've had across cities in the US and in other places at the parcel levels that most of the land is private residential. Most of the tree canopy, when viewed from above, is private residential. And most of the opportunities for additional greening are also on private residential. So in the case of New York City, you have 750,000 private forest owners, residential landowners. So that's a different, fundamentally different problem than one Department of Transportation planting street trees or one Parks Department putting trees in parks. So we need to understand the motivations, capacities, and interests of private residential landowners. Moving to the census block group or census tract or neighborhood scale, one of the most clear and consistent findings from dozens of high resolution tree canopy assessments that I've worked on in partnership with the University of Vermont and others. There's now a small cottage industry using similar methods. Higher income areas have more tree canopy than their lower income counterparts, and communities of color tend to have less tree canopy than their predominantly white counterparts. Trees are long-lived, fundamentally slow-growing organisms. And so you can look at those correlations today, but to really understand, the patterns we see today, which is, why I'm a geographer, it's not where, it's why there. Why do some neighborhoods have more tree canopy than others? And so did a series of studies looking at discriminatory lending policies associated with redlining, the Homeowners Loan Corporation in the mid-1930s. And what we see is that those formerly A-graded communities, which were US-born, single-family detached, white neighborhoods, have on average 43% tree canopy today. And those formerly degraded neighborhoods, denser housing stock, smaller yards, communities of color, immigrants, have about 23% tree canopy today. And so if you're new to the urban forestry space, I want you to imagine you have an umbrella on a rainy day, you have 43% of an umbrella. And then I want you to imagine it's a rainy day and you have 23% of an umbrella. It's not only statistically significant difference beyond the realm of chance, but it's a very meaningful difference in terms of the ecosystem services provided in terms of stormwater and of course heat. And so there's a long history and legacy, and we see that reflected in the patterns today. And as Joel mentioned and Danielle mentioned, this is fundamentally a discussion of equity, of who's receiving those benefits and who's not. And these are slow changing systems. And we often talk about resilience in a positive way, but I might suggest that one of the most resilient systems in this country has been in racism. And so to challenge that and improve tree equity, I think we need to think a little bit about the history of how we got there. And so that's something we've been working on.
I have a question, if that's okay. Just a observation, personal observation. We're seeing I live out in Silver Spring, fairly far, not too far from DC. And we're seeing quick demographic shifts in the communities out there. It's going from white to mainly Latino and more Black families. But we're also seeing a lot of those families taking down the trees that are in those lots and in their backyards to get grass and other things. So I'm wondering if there's also a cultural aspect to that, and the fact that we're losing so many mature trees now in the suburban areas, which is also going to affect the heat within the cities, is whether anyone's done any analysis on that and the ways to sort of try and educate or combat some of that tree loss.
Sure, absolutely. So tree canopy change, there's a headwind in that losing tree canopy is an event. It's a removal, death, disease, storm, happens very quickly. And tree canopy gain is a process. It's slow. It's shrubby areas growing into trees, succession along roads, highways, things like that. It's grow out of the existing trees and it's planting of new trees. And so there's sort of a built-in headwind in that losing canopy is an event, gaining canopy is a process. Now I mentioned 750,000 foreigners in New York City or 220,000 in Baltimore where I do a lot of my work. Yeah, they're diverse. They have different motivations, capacities, and interests. And it's not just as simple as more canopy. That is true at a block group scale, but at a parcel scale, a longtime mentor and a boss, Morgan Grove, you know, he says he's got a PhD, his dad's a lawyer. They're both white males, similar bank accounts. But, you know, 10 years ago, his dad manages his backyard for least maintenance possible because he's older. And at the time when Morgan was really pushing this idea of lifestyle and life stage, so density matters, yes. Social stratification matters, yes. But lifestyle and life stage matters too, or what we call the theory of an ecology of prestige. Because he managed his backyard for wiffle ball. His kids were 8 and 12 at the time. And so, yeah, we need the normal indicators of environmental injustice, but I think we need actually a higher resolution to look more at some of the cultural differences that you were suggesting and lifestyle and life stage and a yes and approach, borrowing from maybe performance art and theater, right? Yes and more data, higher resolution and more attributes.
I think I can add to that. Just in some of our community engagement, we recognize that a lot of people, when they see a tree and a big tree, say, oh, I gotta maintain this. I can't afford to maintain this. I don't know how, I don't know where to start. So I think if we can also develop ways to get information to residents and just be more active in doing this, just doing what's information, because it's like there may be opportunities and programs to help alleviate the cost of that, or even show people how to maybe prune their trees, or say, it's big, but it's pretty healthy tree, so you might not have any issues for a while. So I think just opening the space for that collaborative way of planning, and even though there are homeowners, but being able to say that even though this tree is here and it's yours, but let's work together to see how this could benefit you in 20 years, so that you're not having direct sunlight into your kitchen all day long. So I think it's a collaborative way of working with the community to say, here's what information we have, but here's how we can maybe help you protect this tree moving down the road.
Yeah. Something I'll add as well, we're talking about, you know, you mentioned private homeowners and privately owned land. Also, as we think about smart growth and land use and, you know, the sort of intersectionality of all these land use and housing issues. An anecdote I'll never forget is from New York City. Environmental leader went on to have a leadership role in environmental justice in New York, talking about the long-term impacts in terms of the locations of the largest parks and the highest quality parks with the most tree cover. And during the Bloomberg years, there is a, you know, asked goal to plant, I don't even know whether it was 1 billion trees or 100 million, but, you know, big number, a lot of zeros, and to use corporate volunteers to keep the numbers down and also have some kind of feel good corporate. And then guess what? It's corporate days out. They're looking for the most pleasant environment to be in, the most accessible by public transit, easiest to get to. And it's, you know, ultimately an inequitable effort to put trees in the places that are easiest for the corporate volunteer group to get to. And that wasn't something which was sketched out in the, you know, in the front end in terms of looking at the inequities of a volunteer run effort like that.
I will say million trees NYC.
Million, okay.
It finished 1.5 years ahead of schedule.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So there was some progress.
Positives, yeah.
Late, and I hope I'm not. I'm full-time as Director of Land Use Development here at Smart Growth America. Since we're talking about trees and disproportionate impacts, one of the lessons learned that I've seen from my career is that even though it's like, it might necessarily be the right thing to do, the community members might not be tracking on that because they might be in a crisis or something else. So a good example, speaking of trees, I remember maybe 15 years ago now at this point, Detroit had a program that they were trying to roll out street trees to a disadvantaged neighborhood. And they hired a cadre of volunteers to go out and door knock and try to get, you put it on private property to get ownership and get signups. And the first tranche, it failed miserably because nobody would open the doors. And then the second tranche, when they finally got some doors to get open and people started talking, they were like, number one, we don't trust the government. Number two, they took the trees from us to begin with, and are they even gonna give us trees that we want? And number three, is this gonna be a sign of gentrification? And are you taking over my community in a covert way? So all of those kind of just stood out to me as like, yes, it might be the right thing to do, but then like, is the community receptive? Or if they're even dealing with something like in the midst of a heat crisis where their light bills are going sky high because they're running an AC, they care two hoots about street trees. So just kind of keeping that in the back of our minds too. Just want to throw that out for the group's consideration.
Thank you, Takara. I hope you're joining us too.
I am. I'm just gonna hang back here. I'm getting over something that's a little scared with me, not COVID, but abundance of caution. So I'll be here hanging out.
Yeah. To make sure we have time to turn it over to the audience, I might cut some of our planned questions short, but I'd like to end on a note that builds from what we heard from Joel at the front end of this convening, thinking about the level of resource that's currently available to address urban heat island effect, invest in climate adaptation, especially in historically underserved communities. I'd love to hear from the group here what you are seeing in terms of progress, investments, or even challenges, because we're here in a group, including leadership from the federal government, from the current funding, from the Inflation Reduction Act, ICHA, whatever you'd like to speak to either. I know that Joshua and Dexter both have some commentary on this.
Yeah, what I could add is, I do think this funding is gonna do some positive. I really think that, just wish it was more, because I looked at some applications that we've been awarded as passed through, and really seeing how some communities don't have an urban forestry program at all and really start from scratch. And it's like, man, if they had this 20 years ago, where could we be now? And so hopeful for the future that we won't be in this situation in 20, 30 years, but just really wish that some of these people have more resources now in communities that are just literally starting from scratch. And thinking that, you have to start somewhere. So hopeful that in the future, we'll start to see some progress, but wish that there was a way to just get this out sooner and get things going, because as we are kind of, doing time of doing processes and whatnot, we realize that extreme heat is happening now. Like, it was super hot yesterday, even today, it was just humidity. So like, things are happening rapidly now, and just wishing there are ways to get this out there just much sooner.
Yeah, sure. Building on that, the Inflation Reduction Act gave 1.5 billion to urban and community forestry. If you take like the biggest urban forestry budget of all time before this and add 2 zeros, that's what this is. American Forest is involved in 39 pass-through. Billions of dollars were applied for. So there's way more demand than is receiving the grant funding. And so there's two sides to that. One is there's still a lot of demonstrated need. And the other is, this is the biggest injection into urban and community forestry ever. This is the moonshot. And so a lot of academic partners are tracking through the transparent funding mechanisms online who's receiving the money, and quickly scrambling to collect baseline data to answer the very simple question, but hard to measure: did it work? To have a pre and a post, and the rollout of that IRA funding is not the most conducive to that kind of analysis, but many of our partners are scrambling to try to put that into place so we can understand biophysical impacts in terms of heat, water, and also health impacts in terms of cooling and exposure and others. So there's a lot of energy. I guess you could say it's a hot topic.
We needed that comment at some point.
Yeah. I've been waiting a while to use that one. So, yeah, there's a lot of energy in IRA-funded urban and community forestry.
Well, I think your comment around this is the moonshot is something we're hearing from the community-based organizations that we often partner with. And unfortunately, it seems to feel like too much of a moonshot to get the application bureaucracy together. And so I know there are many organizations here providing support to groups on the ground, and maybe commentary on that from Paul, but that's something that we're hearing.
Yeah, and something else I just want to mention about IRA. So Joel mentioned about $7 billion. You mentioned about 1.5 billion. I'm going to mention another 20 billion. And so, and I know that the National Housing Trust is part of this, but through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, particularly, it's really creating an ecosystem of financing. So both a centralized and decentralized model of funding and financing via EPA. So awardees have been selected. There's going to be about $14 billion available that you can leverage for financial products through a centralized system of third-party partners, and then a decentralized partner that's going to be 1,000 plus nonprofit financial institutions. So these are CFIs, other community lenders like credit unions and others, and that will provide money. One really interesting thing about it is it's for clean technologies and it has to be proven commercially viable technologies. And something that Joel's team worked on very hard as well was making sure that nature-based solutions were called out specifically for this. And so trees are a proven technology. And that also is one of the benefits that you have to do as part of, there's a few requirements as part of it, but include things such as adding climate benefits. So thinking through nature-based solutions. So there's all these different tools and resources that are available now. And this will be available for like the next 7 to 15 years or so, depending on what the applications of the awards are. And all this money has to go out by September 30th. So it should go out soon. So just being aware that there's additional pots of money that are going to be traditional finance and what the Herculean efforts that affordable housing can doing. This isn't, hopefully will make it a little bit easier, but you can also access this financing for things like nature-based solutions, things like trees, and then other type of proven technologies that exist.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I want to make sure we have some time to open the floor and then also recognize we're going to disperse in a breakout group. So we'll have the chance to discuss more. I think also folks in the EPA will be dispersed amongst the group. So we'll have that kind of federal network member mix. Do folks have questions for the panelists? And I might also ask if we can look in the chat to see if any of the virtual folks have questions.
No questions online so far, but if you guys have any questions you'd like to put in the chat, feel free.
Oh, question.
So something that I've noticed and am passionate about is invasive vines. That's on public and private lands. What is the response around that? Like, and removal? I mean, this is just, it's on federal highways, it's, city government, it's kind of everywhere. And I worry about those and the other invasive species that are kind of crowding out our forests.
In Baltimore City Rec and Parks as weed warriors. I'm a card carrying member.
I'm a card carrying member too.
Nice.
I've done the weed warriors training. I'm a volunteer invasive remover. Baltimore Green Space nonprofit also has the villainous vines. The urban forestry world is just full of puns and alliteration. Anyway, so there's a lot of efforts in many cities I work in, have community groups that see this as a problem and have collaborative solutions across different sectors and partners. And it's a mix of top down and bottom up, but yeah, I mean, invasives are certainly an issue. And it's not just the vines. Emerald ash borer, spotted lanternfly seems to be okay. We don't.
Unless you grow grapes.
What's that?
Unless you grow grapes.
Right. Emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle. So it's not just other vegetation, but also bugs.
Isn't there was a report that came out recently about forests, generally forests on the East Coast, and the two biggest threats are actually invasives and deer populations for actually the survival. And I think only 3%, like it was a massive number of forests on the East Coast are threatened, are basically disappearing because of those threats. So regardless of the urban piece, there's a much bigger sort of regional piece that's not just about losing trees in the landscape, but actually these invasives that are creating the death of all our forests.
Yeah, there's actually some forest ecologists who are now studying forested areas within cities as a reference because they don't have deer browse in the same intensity that their rural counterparts. And so referent may have kind of flipped with deer pressure.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, we always learn something new because this is way over my head. I'll say, as we're thinking about the breakout groups as well, addressing both the urban tree canopy, urban housing, an issue that's core for us at Smart Growth America too, is also thinking about regional land use policy and the impact of sprawl, the level of asphalt and hard infrastructure that's contributing to urban heat island regionally. Just this week, we heard from a reporter covering a story related to real estate in Vegas, which is one of the, as we heard, extremely susceptible to extreme heat on account of both climate impacts and regional land use patterns. And this is something which had never occurred to a reporter covering real estate topics. So I think it's also why I love the Smart Growth Network. There's a lot of silo busting. I think for many of us, it's obvious that it all connects, but it's not necessarily carrying over to folks that are really only focused on one sector. Do we have any other questions?
I had a question that kind of leads off of your comment. I work in infrastructure and development, and we know that there's historic investments in trees, but there are also at the same time historic investments in our infrastructure. And are there tie-ins where, as we're developing new infrastructure, we're also adding green infrastructure alongside that, or tying in the funding to do both at the same time? And I think that would be truly sort of transformative if that was happening anywhere.
Well, I'll say this, maybe we, Eric, I wonder, do you know if Corrigan's in today? Because we have sort of a bad news version of this, which is analysis of how the IJA dollars are being used, which does not align with the vision that you have. Do other folks have commentary or panelists?
I can,
Yeah.
do you want to go ahead?
Oh, you haven't gone in a while?
Well, I can say that, you know, I don't know if it's being integrated as much as maybe we'd like, but I would say, you know, to the funding issue, we do see that there are a lot of programs that have certain piles of money for, you know, heat related things. So one example is the Department of Transportation has their Protect program. And that is the, I'm going to read it because I don't know that, is promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient and cost savings transportation. So under that program, they have $1.4 billion annually for 5 years. So that's some money that communities can use to do things like trees and green space and other great things. But I think that the intention is probably there by the administration, but you know, in practice is probably something else and goes to, you know, the whole idea of metrics and measuring, and that a few people have said, yeah.
Tangentially involved in this work group with NOAA and federal DOT and Forest Service and CDC that's trying to put, right now, the value of trees planted along roads is zero. It's not valued. And so to attach an ecosystem service value and a cooling benefit, a cooling to a live save times the cost of the value of a statistical life, to put some kind of value into grant applications. So when recipients are getting federal DOT dollars, they can get a plus up in their applications for explicitly including trees. So no, federal DOT is interested in incorporating that kind of approach.
Can we get native trees?
Well, I think we'll wrap this up with a roundup rapid fire. Whoever would like to start, if you have one sentence of what you hope this group can do to address extreme heat.
Started now.
Yeah.
Trees necessary, but not sufficient.
Reducing emissions, clean energy and other items.
Thank you. Can we do a round of applause? Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for being here, and the virtual folks. Welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone we had a great session downstairs. Lovely to get a sense of the vibe in the virtual room, and I think we're excited to hear from everyone. So do folks want to self-nominate to report back?
I can report back for my group. Should I start or should we?
Yeah.
We're good. Okay. So we heard from a lot of folks about a variety of different projects happening within their organizations. Let's see, so we started with Matt, who is with ULI, and he discussed your report first, actually, Catherine, called SCORE.
Yeah, best title. I'm glad we got the good title.
That was mentioned under kind of, and you probably can explain it better, but I wrote down something about engaging private developers. I might have completely misunderstood, but if you want to give us one sentence, actually.
Sure. So Scorch, I previously worked with Matt at the Urban Land Institute, running the Urban Resilience Program, which engages the real estate industry on the impacts of climate change and relevance to real estate and built environment. Oh, and this is from when we. Yeah, blast. Like there's 300 in the ULI print room. Which looked at the impact of extreme heat on building design, urban design and built environment. And yeah, and we did double check whether there was like a romance series with this name. So, you know, this is now, I think, kind of like basic material given where, but I think what I take away from this report is at the time, we got a lot of pushback around trying to put this out. It was, why would the industry care? Why is it relevant to us? Both like not really an issue and not our problem. And so I think the industry's come a long way. Unfortunately, we're all feeling it more, but I think at least there's been progress in terms of recognition of the issue.
I think in parallel to that, I think the Landscape Architect Association, I think it is, they've just put out a climate change report as well. So thinking about how those, how their design of urban green spaces is also contributing to kind of, and think about climate change and the materials they're using, stuff like that, which could be interesting.
We also talked about a resource called Developing Urban Resilience, which includes a variety of case studies and examples from all over the country that ULI has put together. And that was an opportunity that was identified for growth, but in that more resources could be added from what this group knows. We heard Shauna shared about a new report from the Federal American Scientists. Federation of American Scientists that also includes a variety of case studies and ideas for policy. So that's another resource to potentially look at. We heard about from Michael incorporating the issue of heat into comprehensive plans and also potentially revisions happening to the smart growth principles at the state level and how those can interact. We heard from ACEEE about the Smart Surfaces Project and how there's some research opportunities happening there, exploring policy related to heat. We heard a little bit about Claire's startup organization called Scalin, is that right? Which does data and analytics and is currently working on a project to understand heat stress specifically in New York City. We heard from Michael at One Tree Planted about urban reforestation efforts and also about a citizen science app that you'd mentioned. I believe that sounded really interesting. Also, Paul mentioned ArcX, which is an EPA resource, also similar a little bit to ULI's Developing Urban Resilience, includes a variety of policies related to climate and heat. And we kind of talked a little bit in our group about how some sort of resource can be created or if ArcX could be improved to make it more accessible and include a broader range of resources and better resources. And then at the very end, we started talking about mobile sensors and how to measure heat more effectively. And we landed on this cool idea of like, what if we use city bikes and shared mobility as a tool to measure like on the ground, sidewalk level heat? And that was really cool. That was an idea from Dexter.
Yes, on our end, I'm really sorry if I'm gonna miss out on something. My fan died, me writing this. We started off with We started off with the issue of resilience index. It was brought up by the American Society of Landscape Architects and then by NOAA. There were two things that we wanted to discover more, which was the scaling down of the analysis to like more of a granular level, to a block level or to a neighborhood level. So community engagement, scaling down the analysis, and then feedback from the community of experts were the things that were asked for this. Please, if I miss out on something, just tell me. Then we moved on to DOT's opportunity on the maturity model, as well as the funding opportunities. The request from DOT was to distribute the information on both the model and funding opportunities. We moved to EPA after we talked about TIC-TACs and ARC-X as well. And we touched on the subcommittee basically to find all the most ground level truth relevant information for everything. On the distribution of resources, we talked about the Smart Growth webinar series from the Maryland Department of Planning. How they have 4 webinars in the next month. And we talked about the EPA Superior Learning Community, Sustainable Community Accelerator Network, which is going to be 30 communities in pairs of 2. That is all of my notes.
Anyone else want to add anything?
online?
The
We
online.
have, online, they dropped in the chat. I'm just gonna read it out. Lauren said, we had a great conversation on many topics. We discussed different grant programs / funding opportunities to work on heat mitigation and resilience, and shared new resources and tools to advance this work. We also heard about challenges such as funding, staff capacity, and data. Alvaro brought up the need to have more data available for Puerto Rico and other US territories to be able to apply for grants that require specific information on heat equity. Kate talked about the need to include schools and daycare into the conversation, since they often have to close or limit time outdoors due to heat. And Alvaro shared that we need to engage transit agencies as well. And we talked about the need to have safe spaces for people waiting for transit.
I think this group clearly covered a lot of ground, and I wanted to invite everyone, if you nominated a resource to, Joseph is a little spontaneous, but everyone heard from Joseph in being invited to join us today. Like, please send us the resource. You know, we can also keep the notes if anyone wants to leave their notes document here, but we can then use that to send a like summary roundup to everyone. And I think it's incredibly valuable to know the like extent of work on this topic that's underway already with this group. And hopefully we can all learn from the work, circulate the work, and also think about what's next, think about the gaps as we like continue to move forward. So I want to thank the EPA for bringing us together, and I see Paul. Announcement.
Yeah, so Paul Angelone, again, I'm from EPA, but I also work with, some of the work that I do is through our energy communities work. So I work a lot with communities that are impacted by power plant retirements or that are coal-fired or coal mine closures and others. And a lot of the communities and the capacity that's needed with those communities both is around how do you transition those jobs, but also transition to a cleaner environment. So just tying into today, a lot of issues around resilience. About 40% of their renters actually aren't able to live in affordable homes. And so like rental affordability is a real challenge in a lot of these energy communities, particularly rural communities. But one of the things that we're really looking to do, the federal government's doing a lot of technical assistance and capacity building around this, but we're also really hoping to build a much broader national capacity building network around these energy communities as well. So for instance, downtown Alexandria is an energy community as well. So these are places that are all over the world. They aren't necessarily just West Virginia and other places. But so one thing is, I wanted to tap into the Smart Growth Network to see if there are organizations or community, different organizations that are actually doing work or would potentially be interested in doing in types of some type of proposal or type of work with these communities, things around like How do you do basic infrastructure? How do you do energy development? How do you do housing affordability? How do you do workforce training development? There's lots of different types of capacity buildings that all these communities are really facing, but really thinking through what are those intermediaries or capacity builders that could do something that we could potentially put you in a room with other philanthropic funders or others, as well as access additional federal resources as well. So one thing is just a request to see are there different types of things that you might be interested in working in as a network so that we could figure out how to identify resources to fund your work in order to go, or find someone who can fund your work to actually work in these communities to help with both energy transition, but really the economic transformation within these places. So.
So if anyone, so we're not gonna have time to discuss that
That's
now, but if
right.
anybody wants,
Yeah.
Paul's gonna be at happy hour. Go talk to him about energy communities. That,
Yeah.
yes?
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me. My name, my last name is it's Angela, it's Angel1 Paul@epa.gov. Feel free to reach out to me and we'll talk, but just really kind of figuring out what the landscape is, because you all have a lot of really great capacity building work, but that's not necessarily things that you would want to propose. And so just trying to figure out what types of things would you be interested in doing, and that's really going to help us narrow into figuring out what type of community that you could serve. So,
Thank you, Paul. I'll do housekeeping before the round of applause, which is we really would love to see folks at the happy hour, and it's an informal happy hour, so it's not a sort of official component. But if you'd like to gather, we're gonna go right downstairs, and if Joseph has more information. But first, I wanted to thank the EPA and the network for convening us, and also especially Joseph and the EPA team for the heavy lifting for the event today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, for happy hour, the Carlisle, oops, sorry, we have people online waving. Goodbye, y'all. Happy hour, we have the Carlisle room. It is right downstairs in the lobby. I'm gonna go down now and help guide y'all, but there's a sign, you'll see the door in case you miss me. It's right when you get off the elevators and walk towards the big front doors in the lobby, it'll be to the right.
So we leave these here?
You can take them if you want, leave them. If
Yeah, we'll use them again if you leave, but you can also take them to, you know, like have a souvenir.
that's for the collection.
Yeah.